Millbrook Hollow was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody. Population 2,000 and something. One stoplight. A diner where the coffee was always too strong and the pie was always just right. And a small white church on Maple Street called Grace Community, with a steeple that had been leaning slightly to the left since the tornado of '98. Ruth and Callahan had been playing piano at that church for 31 years. She had buried her husband, raised 2 daughters, and watched half the town grow up from her seat behind that old upright piano. But nothing in 31 years had prepared her for the Sunday that changed everything. Because that was the Sunday little Eli Turner collapsed. Eli was 5 years old. Blonde hair, gap-toothed smile, the kind of kid who waved at everyone, even people he'd never met. His mother, Sarah, was a single mom working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His father had left before Eli turned 2, and Sarah had carried that boy through every hard season alone, holding on to one thing and one thing only. Faith. Every single Sunday, no matter how tired she was, no matter how thin the paycheck stretched, Sarah brought Eli to church. She used to whisper to him in the pew, "This is our safe place, baby. God's got us here." She had no idea how true those words were about to become. It was an ordinary Sunday morning, sunlight pouring gold through the stained glass, when Eli suddenly grabbed his chest and gasped. Sarah turned just in time to catch him as he slumped sideways, his small body going limp in her arms. "Eli? Eli, baby, look at me." He wasn't breathing. The church, which had been filled with quiet singing seconds before, erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor. Pastor Michael Reeves, a man who had preached hundreds of sermons about trusting God in the storm, found himself living one, sprinting down the aisle toward a mother cradling her lifeless son. "Call 911. Somebody call 911 now." Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she couldn't even hold her phone. An off-duty nurse named Diane Whitfield, sitting 3 rows back, rushed forward and began CPR right there on the church floor, counting compressions out loud, tears streaming down her face with every push. "Come on, baby. Come on. Breathe." The ambulance was 15 minutes away. 15 minutes that felt like 15 years. And in that 15 minutes, something happened that no one in Millbrook Hollow would ever forget. Pastor Reeves knelt beside Sarah, placed one hand on Eli's small chest, and lifted his voice, not calm, not composed, but raw and desperate, the way real prayer sounds when everything you love is on the line. "Lord, we are asking you. We are begging you. This baby boy belongs to you before he belongs to anyone else. Breathe life back into him, God. Please. Not our will, but yours. But please, Lord, please." Behind him, the congregation had gathered in a circle, hands reaching toward Eli and Sarah, voices rising together in prayer. Some were crying. Some were on their knees. An elderly man named Walter Higgins, who hadn't prayed out loud in public since his own son passed away 20 years earlier, found himself whispering through tears, "God, if you're listening, give this mama back her boy." Diane kept counting. Kept pushing. Kept refusing to stop. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Then 2. Sarah wasn't screaming anymore. She had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when a person has nothing left but surrender. She pressed her forehead against her son's small hand and whispered the only words she had left. "Please, God. Please don't take him. Please give me one more chance to be his mom." And then Eli coughed. It was small at first. A twitch. A flutter of his eyelashes. Then his chest rose on its own, and a second cough, deeper this time, tore through the silence of that sanctuary like the most beautiful sound anyone had ever heard. "He's breathing. Oh my God, he's breathing." Diane fell back onto the floor, sobbing, her hands still trembling from the compressions. Sarah scooped her son into her arms, rocking him, kissing his forehead over and over, saying his name like it was the only word she knew. Eli. Eli. My baby. My sweet boy. The paramedics arrived moments later and rushed him to the hospital, but by then, color had already returned to his cheeks. His little eyes fluttered open in the ambulance, and the first thing he asked, according to the paramedic who later told the story with tears in her own eyes, was, Mommy, why is everybody crying? Because everybody was. Word spread through Millbrook Hollow before the sun even set that day. Not through social media, not through the news, but the way things used to spread in small towns, one porch to another, one phone call to the next. By evening, half the town had gathered outside the hospital, holding candles, holding hands, praying in a parking lot under a sky that seemed to glow softer than usual. People who hadn't stepped foot in a church in years showed up that night. Grown men who prided themselves on never showing emotion stood shoulder to shoulder, wiping their eyes. A teenage boy named Cody, who had been struggling with his own private battles no one knew about, later said that standing in that crowd, watching strangers cry together over a little boy they barely knew, was the first time in years he felt like maybe there was still something good left in the world. Maybe there was still a reason to keep going. The doctors at the hospital ran every test they could. They found nothing wrong with Eli's heart. No blockage, no defect, nothing that explained what had happened. One doctor, a man named Dr. Alvarez who had practiced medicine for over 20 years, simply shook his head and said quietly to Sarah, Ma'am, I can't explain this. Medically, there's no reason he should be sitting here talking to you right now. Sarah just smiled through her tears and said, I can explain it. God wasn't finished with him yet. The following Sunday, Grace Community Church was full in a way it hadn't been in decades. Cars lined both sides of Maple Street. Folding chairs were set up in the back because every pew was taken. People who hadn't prayed in years came to say thank you. People who had given up on faith came just to see the boy who was, according to everyone who witnessed it, given back. Ruthann sat down at that old piano, her fingers trembling slightly, and began to play the same hymn she had played 1,000 times before. But this time, when the congregation sang, something was different. The voices weren't just words. They were surrender. They were gratitude. They were 2,000 people in a small town remembering, all at once, what it felt like to believe. Pastor Reeves stood at the front, looked out over the packed sanctuary, and instead of a prepared sermon, he simply said this. Some of you came here today because you heard about a miracle. And I want you to know, you're right. A miracle happened in this room. But I need you to understand something. The miracle wasn't just that a little boy started breathing again. The miracle is what happened in the 15 minutes before that. Strangers became family. Silence became prayer. Fear became faith. And I believe, with everything in me, that God didn't just save Eli that day. He was calling this whole town back home. Sarah stood near the front, Eli's small hand wrapped tightly in hers, his other hand waving at a woman he didn't even know, the way he always did. She leaned down and whispered in his ear, You hear that, baby? You brought this whole town back to church. Eli just smiled his gap-toothed smile and said, I just wanted a snack after, Mommy. The whole church laughed through their tears, because sometimes that's exactly what healing sounds like. Not perfect words. Not polished moments. Just a little boy who has no idea he's a miracle, and a room full of grown adults who will never forget what it felt like to watch God show up when they needed him most. Today, if you drive through Millbrook Hollow, you'll still see that little white church with the leaning steeple. Ruthann still plays that same piano every Sunday. Walter Higgins hasn't missed a service since that day, and he prays out loud now, every single week, without fear. Diane Whitfield keeps a small photo of Eli on her refrigerator, a reminder of the day her hands became an answer to prayer. And Sarah, she still whispers the same words to her son every single Sunday morning as they walk through those church doors. This is our safe place, baby. God's got us here. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't just the moment breath returns to a small, still body. Sometimes the miracle is what happens in the hearts of everyone standing around, watching, praying, believing again for the first time in years. If this story touched your heart today, know this. Whatever storm you're walking through right now, whatever silence you've been sitting in, whatever prayer you've been afraid to pray out loud, God is not finished with your story either. Sometimes the breakthrough comes in the last 15 minutes. Sometimes it comes when you've got nothing left but a whispered please. And sometimes, it comes exactly when an entire town needs a reason to believe again. Hold on. Keep praying. Your miracle might be closer than you think.